What's up guys, you're watching Life ITCG. Today's video is a modern deck profile of Enduring Ideal. So I wasn't initially planning to do a video on this. It's just been a little fun deck I've been brewing for a while. But I took it to FNM today because it's the first time I've had all the cards, and I went 3-0, 6-0, so I won all 3 matches without dropping a game. So I thought, that's a decent result, I might as well do a video on it. So, if you're not familiar, the Enduring Ideal deck is of course built around the namesake card. So it's a 7 mana sorcery. What it does is you search a library for an enchantment and put it directly onto the battlefield, and then it also has the epic ability. So once you've cast this spell once, you can't play any other spell for the rest of the game, and then in every upkeep you get another copy of this. So every turn you get an enchantment from your library onto the battlefield. So as you can imagine, any enchantment, any mana cost, once per turn, it's very easy to assemble some combination of enchantments that wins the game. So this is essentially like a 7 mana sorcery that instantly wins. So it's not too different to something like Scapeshift in that sense, or maybe Ad Nauseam. So because it's a 7 mana sorcery, and unlike something like Scapeshift, you don't actually care about how many lands you have in play. So it makes perfect sense to combine Enduring Ideal with Lotus Bloom. So if you suspend a Lotus Bloom on turn 1 and you make your land drops from turn 1 to 4, then on turn 4 you can cast Enduring Ideal and win the game. So you might think that the rest of the deck would be built like with sort of blue cards, right, like cantrips and stuff like that, to help you find these Enduring Ideal and assemble this combo more reliably. But the issue with that approach is that you basically become like just a worse Ad Nauseam, because with Ad Nauseam your kill spell, quote unquote, is only 5 mana, not 7. So you lose some edge there in that with this deck. If you're trying to ramp into this with like Pentad Prism and stuff, that's much harder to do because it requires way more resources. And the other thing with Ad Nauseam is that once you cast Ad Nauseam, you win in that turn. So it lets you build your deck with Pact of Negation, which is a pretty big upside. But with this, you need multiple turns to set up your enchantments. You're going to need a few Enduring Ideals to make sure you win the game. So you can't build your deck with Pact of Negation. So in that sense, Ad Nauseam, if you want to take that approach, Ad Nauseam is a stronger deck. But the problem with Ad Nauseam, of course, is that you need another card that combos with it, like the Angel's Grace or the Phyrexian Unlife. Whereas with this deck, you only need your big bomb card and the mana to do it. So it's a little bit more like Scapeshift in that sense. So instead, the approach that you should take, I think, with Enduring Ideal is that you use Lotus Bloom in addition to Nykthos as the mana acceleration, and then you play a ton of white enchantments, because not only do they form part of your toolbox of things that you can search with Enduring Ideal, but the devotion and the mana cost of your white enchantments helps accelerate you to this 7 mana and those enchantments themselves help to like disrupt your opponent and stall the game to the point where you can find the Enduring Ideal. So that's kind of the philosophy behind this deck. It's kind of like a ad nauseum scapeshift hybrid is how I would sort of describe it. The reason to play this over either of those decks is because you think that any of the white enchantments that you can play gives you a really big edge in the metagame. So at the moment, or at any time, it just sort of depends what the metagame is doing. So like, for example, we need to get into those enchantments for you to know what I mean. So of course the deck has 4 Enduring Ideal and 4 Lotus Bloom to start. Just the kill spell and the mana to play it. And then with the Nykthos you need white permanents to give you that devotion. So we have 4 Leyline of Sanctity and 4 Ruined Halo. Well, these are what kind of what I would describe as like the core enchantments of the deck. Leyline of Sanctity is very good at protecting your hand from discard, because you are that kind of like combo deck that's trying to hold its key spell until it combos off. You, in a way, you are a bit like Valakut because you do need some number of resources to get up to that 7 mana, even if you do have the Lotus to like give you a bit of a boost in that regard. And also Leyline can just be a really good card against a few decks in Modern. Like the Valakut itself has some difficulty getting over it. If you get paired against Burn, the fact that you have Leyline in your main deck can be like a free win almost. Yeah, and then with Ruined Halo it's kind of the same sort of situation. You know, Storm, that's another deck where the main deck Leyline can be really strong. You just name Grape, you just block Grape Shot. All the things that you might want to give yourself Shroud from, you can also name with Ruined Halo, and it also shuts down a lot of creature threats. Like if you just play this down, you name you know, Death Shadow or Reality Smasher, then not only does it stop one copy that they have in play, but all the future copies that they draw. Yeah, it's just like an extremely flexible removal spell, and of course both of these cards give you 2 devotion each, so that's really good to help you ramp into that 7 mana for the Enduring Ideal. Then what other enchantments? So everything from this point onwards, I would say that these 8 are sort of like a staple no matter what, but the rest is kind of like a bit of a metagame call, I think, because obviously there are lots of different enchantments in the Modern format that you could potentially use. So the ones that I'm playing are 4 Cast Out, 4 Stasis Snare, 4 Nevermore, yeah, that's the non-one-offs, shall we say. So Cast Out is kind of like an Oblivion Ring. You need to play a certain number of Oblivion Rings in your deck anyway, just in case when you cast Enduring Ideal and you need to remove something. So it's not, so in that sense the fact that it costs 4 mana isn't a downside, because you're tutoring at it from your library in some number of situations anyway. And just having the flexibility to either like help you dig faster towards the Enduring Ideal or remove a key permanent on the opponent's side. It's just nice to have the option of either cycling it or holding it in your hand. Just a nice flexible removal spell. Then the 4 Stasis Snare seems like a bit of an underpowered card for Modern, but I pretty highly rate having the double mana symbol, especially when you're trying to use your Nykthos to cast something that costs 7. The flash is also like pretty relevant as well, like if your Amulet opponent tries to haste their Titan or something, then being able to like surprise exile that out from under them could make a pretty big difference. Through the Breach Emrakul was not really a thing that people try and do anymore, but that was a deck for a while, and it was pretty funny to watch them tap out for that and use Stasis Snare their Emrakul. Yeah, so just or yeah, if your opponent goes all in on something with a Arcbound Ravager or just a flash removal can be pretty solid. And yeah, and again, I really like the double mana symbol. And then Nevermore, it's kind of similar, like 3 mana permanent with 2 white symbols is like a solid devotion enabler. And if you know what to name with this card, then it can be like extremely disruptive in certain matchups. And the other thing that is really nice about this card is that it lets you dodge a lot of weird sideboard stuff. For example, like you can name the common enchantment destruction cards, or you can name counter spells that your opponent will be playing to like effectively silence them and make sure that your Enduring Ideal resolves. So yeah, it's a little bit tricky to use. Obviously you have to be pretty familiar with what the metagame is doing, so you can always make sure you name the right thing. But in general, I think this is like a pretty solid card in the modern format for this deck anyway. Obviously it doesn't really make too much sense in other lists, but you know, when you need the enchantments, you want the devotion, then it's just a solid pick, I think. So yeah, so that's the core of the disruption package. So just to quickly go through this again: 4 Nevermore, 4 Stasis Snare, 4 Cast Out, 4 Rude Hello, 4 Leyline. Common, semi-common ones that I'm not playing Ghostly Prison. I don't think the metagame warrants that right now. There's no deck that's really so aggro. That's a big part of the format. And I do think that Ghostly Prison, the fact that it only stops attacks, is a huge liability against things like Thought-Knot Seer, Kitesail, Freebooter, and especially Meddling Mage. These are all creatures that can be really problematic for you if they stay on the board, even if they're not attacking. You'd much rather have a card like Stasis Snare that can actually remove them from the battlefield. So that's my opinion on Ghostly Prison. Suppression Field is another option for a card that's quite frequently used in this kind of disruption sort of package. I think that card is okay. I'm a little bit wary of decks in the meta that it misses against, and it only while it does that, it only provides 1 devotion. So while I think that card can definitely be powerful in the right metagame, I'm not sure that this is it. But there's always something that you should be re-evaluating, because that card can have a pretty disruptive effect in the right matchups. It doesn't affect this deck too much. It makes cycling Cast Out more expensive, for example, but it's normally pretty easy to build your deck in a way that it doesn't affect you much, if at all. So that's something to think about. But you'll see that there's a small number of activated abilities in the deck. Another card that's commonly played that I'm not playing is Porphyry Nodes as creature removal. And you might think that that makes complete sense, because you know, so far it's a creatureless deck, and you know, Porphyry Nodes is a white permanent. It's a nice enchantment. It gives you devotion. It kills your opponent's creatures for no drawback, right? Seems perfect. But the problem with Porphyry Nodes is that in creatureless matchups, it's a complete blank. You can't even play it to give yourself 1 devotion because it just self-destructs immediately. And the other important reason why I'm not playing Porphyry Nodes is because I'm also playing 4 copies of Wall of Omens. I think this card is great. It gives you 1 white devotion while replacing itself. It stalls your opponent's board for a while. Not really much to say, you know, it's just a really solid card for a white devotion list in Modern. And of course it's not good at all with 4/3 nodes, because it has 0 power and it just dies. So that's the other main reason why I'm not playing the nodes. So yeah, 4 Wall of Omens are the only creatures in the deck. Yeah, so there's also 6 one-of enchantments. So far, if you're unfamiliar with the deck, you might be wondering exactly what's going on with the entire strategy, because obviously you can play Enduring Ideal, but you know, none of these ley lines or Ruined Halos are going to win you the game. So what's the plan? So we have this 6 one-of enchantments. Phyrexian Unlife, Overwhelming Splendor, Dovescape, Dawn of Hope, Sphere of Safety, and Form of the Dragon. So the Phyrexian Unlife is 100% essential. There are going to be plenty of situations where you're about to die, and you cast Enduring Ideal, and you need to find 1 enchantment that guarantees you not to die. So, for example, both of these are sometimes good enough. If your opponent has an extremely wide board, then Overwhelming Splendor won't work because all their creatures will still have power. If your opponent has a lot of mana, then Sphere of Safety won't really help you, especially if they only need to attack with 1 thing to kill you. Worship is something I've tried as well. You know, it goes with the Wall of Omens, and sometimes that's a pretty hard thing for decks to deal with, but at the same time it's also quite unreliable because this deck doesn't really put creatures on the battlefield that consistently. So the thing about Phyrexian Unlife is that I'm sure most Modern players are probably familiar with this way this card works, is that no matter how many creatures your opponent has on the battlefield, as long as you have positive life total when their combat phase starts, even if they deal you like 100 damage in 1 attack, you will go down to negative 100 life, but you won't die, because you need to start on negative life for the poison counter mechanic to apply. So if your opponent has like a massive board, you just you play Enduring Ideal, you get Phyrexian Unlife, then they attack you for 1,000,000, you go down to negative 1,000,000, then the next turn with your Enduring Ideal you get Form of the Dragon, and then at the end of the turn you'll go back onto 5 life, and then the same situation will happen a second time, right? They'll attack you for 1,000,000, you go down to negative 1,000,000 because you are on a positive life total, and then at the end of the turn your life total becomes 5 again. So once you're in this situation, it's basically impossible to lose via combat. The only exception is that if your opponent has like first strike or double strike stuff, so like in the first strike combat damage step they put you on a negative life total, and then on the normal damage step they deal you 10 damage and then you get 10 poison counters and you lose. That's the only thing you really have to watch out for. Or you know, they like double bolt you before attacking and you go to negative life, something like that. So, but yeah, this kind of combo is really essential for protecting yourself. Otherwise, there are too many situations where you just top deck Enduring Ideal and you cast it and then you die anyway. One question is, should you play Form of the Dragon or Solidarity? Solidarity, that's not right, is it? Solemnity. It's a 3-mana white enchantment. You can't get counters is the important part of what it says. So as long as you have Solemnity and Phyrexian Unlife, then when you're on a negative life total and they deal damage to you, you can't get infect counters. So the net effect is that you take no damage basically and you can't die. So the upside of Solemnity is that you can cast it from your hand. So what that means is that you can't be stuck with no way to assemble this combo. Because before you play the Enduring Ideal, you could just play the Solemnity out of your hand, because it's just a 3 mana white enchantment as opposed to 7 mana triple red, which is basically uncastable. Of course you can do it with Lotus Bloom, but not always the easiest thing to pull off. So that's the upside of Solemnity, and of course not only does it prevent you from getting that soft lock straight in your hand, but just being able to play the Solemnity down to help you ramp your devotion is like a positive element of that card. So the upside for Form of the Dragon is that it's a win condition. You do have other win conditions, and once your opponent is locked out of the game, it's kind of academic which one that you pick. So Form of the Dragon's kind of nice because it kills your opponent really quickly in 5 life chunks, but quite often that's not really that relevant. The other thing about why I like Form of the Dragon is that you easily can cast it with Lotus Bloom, and there are quite a few decks that have a big issue dealing with the creatures that flying can't attack you part. Like Death Shadow, for example, like they just have shadows and anglers and not really any other win condition at all. So you just sit behind this, you go to 5 and not worry about it, and then it puts a 4-turn clock on them, and you can just cast it off your Lotus Bloom, no problem. Yeah, that's a main upside why I like this card. Being like a really fast clock, just like Lava Axing your opponent every turn, is like semi-nice, and in some cases maybe in like paper you want a way to kill your opponent more quickly rather than just like waiting for them to deck out, which is one of the win conditions you can use. But yeah, if you really wanted to play Solemnity instead of this, I wouldn't fault you for that. I think that's a pretty close decision. But you do need to be playing Unlife plus either one of those cards. I think that's really essential. You can't just rely on Seer of Safety or Overwhelming Splendor. But of course both of those cards are here in the deck anyway, just because again, sometimes any number of these cards are stuck in your hand. You can only assemble like half of the combo. For example, this is a really good combo because Overwhelming Splendor makes all your opponent's creatures 1/1s, and then with no abilities, and then this card says creatures with no abilities can't attack, so that's another way to not die. All these cards just like overlap in slightly different ways, and all of the white ones are just fine to cast from your hand at any time, even without the Enduring Ideal anyway, so that's another nice upside. And the other two enchantments, Dovescape. If this card wasn't printed, then the deck probably wouldn't work, or it would at least be significantly worse. What this does is whenever your opponent plays a non-creature spell, counter it, and then whenever any player casts a non-creature spell, counter it, and then that spell's controller gets a number of 1/1 birds equal to that spell's converted mana cost. Of course, once you have cast Enduring Ideal, you don't cast any more spells for the rest of the game anyway, so this doesn't affect you at all. And then this just counters every single spell your opponent plays while giving them birds. And of course, you don't care about birds because you have this combo I just explained that makes your opponent's combat step irrelevant. So it just hard locks your opponent out of the game, basically. You only have to worry about creature spells, but you don't really have to worry about most creature spells either because you have this, which means that all creatures have no abilities, or at least your opponent's ones don't. And uncounterable spells, the only one you have to worry about is Abrupt Decay, which is sometimes scary because it can kill your Unlife through a Dovescape, but if you are worried about your opponent putting you in that situation, then you use your Enduring Ideal to search up a Nevermore and you just name Abrupt Decay, and then it basically totally locks your opponent anyway. And the last card is 1 Dawn of Hope. So it's just nice to have like an extra backup win condition in case your Form of the Dragon gets exiled somehow, like your opponent Thought Not sees it, or anything like that. Making a bunch of 1/1s is a nice combo with Overwhelming Splendor because it turns everything to a 1/1, so you have free creatures that battle on parity with the real expensive creatures that your opponent is trying to cast. And it's just like a nice card advantage engine against the control decks. It's like relatively cheap to cast. So what you'll often see in this slot is something like Heliod. I don't like that because if you turn it on with the Devotion, then it gets either like Path to Exiled or O-Code, and that's not really anything that you want to be happening. Luminarch Ascension is alright, but it can't help you to stabilize the board, because if your opponent's attacking you successfully, then you can't make tokens with that, whereas with this you can. So overall, I think Dawn of Hope is one of the better options. So yeah, that's all the spells, and now it's only the mana base. So of course we have the 4 Nykthos. I don't know how people pronounce this. Yeah, so even though it's legendary, you want 4 just because it's that good. One of the games today, my opponent was playing Shadow, and I tapped out with the Nykthos to make 7 mana exactly, and then I played another one, Legend Rule the first one, and then I made like another bunch of mana, and then I played Enduring Ideal, and it resolved because his hand was double stub. So and he didn't have a creature out because I removed it. So yeah, it's kind of just like Gaia's Cradle or whatever. Basically, it's worth playing for even though it's legendary. Then 10 Snow Plains. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Snow is relevant for some sideboard cards, so gotta play Snow. Sorry. If you have your favorite Snow, or sorry, non-Snow Plains art, we've got the Snow synergies. 4 Temple of Red and White. This is kind of a holdover from when I had a list that had a bit of a red splash. I think temples are alright. You are hunting for the Enduring Ideal in a way, and because you're like a mono white deck, you don't really have too much library manipulation, and because you are sort of like a controlling prison-y kind of deck, you can afford to have a counterplay tap land. With the Scry effect tacked on. Even on turn 1, like, the deck actually has no plays that cost 1 mana, which seems like a little bit of a red flag, maybe, but it seems to work, so let's not think about that too much. But yeah, you can play your temple on turn 1 if you have it, and get a free Scry, no problem. But I'm not playing any red cards at the moment, so this could be any white temple of your choosing, or even a new Benalia if you want to be really cheap about it. And then the last 4 cards, all different utility lands. So I have 1 Mistveil Plains and 1 Hall of Heliod's Generosity. So both of these are used as effects to put your enchantments back inside your library. So if you resolve your Enduring Ideal and you have a critical piece stuck in your hand, like Dovescape, for instance, the only way you can get it back into your library, so you can search it out and put it on the battlefield, is to draw up to your maximum hand size, and then discard it in your end step, and then either put it on the bottom with this or put it on top with this. and then use Enduring Ideal to put it into play. Some people play Peace of Mind, which is a white enchantment that lets you basically discard cards whenever you want, and that lets you do that faster. You don't have to wait to discard it to hand size. But overall, I think that card is a bit too weak to play at main deck, basically just for that effect. It has an effect that makes you gain a bit of life, which usually isn't worth the cards that you're discarding to it. So yeah, I don't bother with that. But yeah, both of these cards are pretty handy, just to recur any important enchantments. So for example, if you cycle a cast out like early in the game, but then you want to get it back later, then you can do that. Or against a control deck, if you want to like rebuy your Dawn of Hope to do something to like keep pressuring your opponent's planeswalkers and stuff, or like threaten them with your tokeny value card advantage engine, you can do that too. It's just like a pretty high utility option to have. Yeah. The other interesting thing about these is that when you play Enduring Ideal, you don't, like, if it was up to you, you would just stop drawing cards, because like you can't cast any of the stuff that you draw, but if you draw it then it's in your hand and you can't tutor it out of your library anymore. But of course the rules of the game, you can't just skip your draw step for no reason. So what you should do is that when this is resolved, you should start activating these as much as possible, just to pad your library with jank. Like if you have any cards in your graveyard, you should just try and like tuck them back into your library as soon as possible. So you have like some irrelevant enchantment in your graveyard. If and your Enduring Ideal is going, if you have Hall of Heliod's Generosity, then you should resolve this, put the enchantment from your library into play, and then at the end of your upkeep you activate this and then put some worthless enchantment on top of your library. So that way you draw that and you guarantee that you don't draw like your Form of the Dragon or your Dovescape or something like really important. And for Mistveil Plains it's the opposite, right? You want to put the blank card on the bottom before you resolve the Enduring Ideal, so that way you tutor out the card that you need, and then your chaff card gets shuffled in, so you have a more chance of drawing that crappy card instead of the Dovescape or whatever thing that you really don't want to draw. So that's a little bit counterintuitive. Like there's not many decks in the format where you want to like pad your library with crap cards, but the epic mechanic is a pretty weird one, so something to be aware of. Yeah, so that's these two lands that just let you recur the enchantments. And the last two lands, one Arch of Orazca. Once you have the City's Blessing, you can pay 5 mana and tap it to draw a card. It's relatively easy to get the City's Blessing because every card in your deck is a permanent, pretty much. You have stuff like Wall of Omens that is a permanent and replaces itself. So this is a pretty strong effect for little opportunity cost, because your deck's monocolor, so having colorless hand is not too big of a drawback. I've seen some people play like a blue splash version for Siege of Azcanta, but I think while that card has a sort of similar effect to this, I think it's much worse. It doesn't give you devotion in the right color, so that's not great. And also not only do you not have cantrips, but you don't really have like any instant or sorceries at all. It's just so hard for you to fill your graveyard to flip it within a reasonable time frame. I really don't think that card makes sense in this deck at all. But I do like the Arch of Orazca. I think that's pretty solid. And then the last card is one Castle Ardenvale. So it just makes 1/1s. It's just like a mini backup win condition, just like with the Dawn of Hope. So once your opponent's completely locked out of the game, you know, with the Dovescape and whatever else, then you can just make a few 1/1s and beat them down. and of course, like I mentioned briefly before, you can also win by what did I just say? I combined buy and via. You can win by a deck out, or milling your opponent, or just waiting for them to draw their library. Because once you have Dovescape, they can't cast anything, they can't attack, they can't damage you, etc., etc. Eventually they'll just draw the entire library and lose. Normally it doesn't work versus Emrakul, but it does work versus like Academy reruns, for example, because you can Overwhelming Splendor them and then they can't activate it. And you have Mistveil Plains and the Heliod tool to make sure that your library is always stocked and you never mill yourself. So that's the other backdoor win condition. So that's why I say that Form of the Dragon isn't 100% totally necessary, because you have all these other ways of backdoor winning the game. But like I said, it does have some other upsides as well, which is why I'm using it at the moment. So yeah, so I do like all of those utility lands. I'm not sure about the right balance of basics and temples, for example. That could there's probably space to fine tune that, but apart from that, I'm really happy with the main deck. Just the walls, the cast out, the Stasis Snare. Even though these cards don't really look like modern playable options, I do think they're quite strong, and that other people playing the deck, still on like Porphyry Nodes and Ghostly Prison and stuff, I think that's not the right place to be. Yeah, so that's the main deck. Then onto the sideboard. The sideboard I sort of just put together in a hurry, like I didn't think about it too much. I just like some strong white sideboard cards. I had 4 Rest in Peace. Yeah, your deck's not really dependent on the graveyard at all. Only if you like a critical piece gets discarded and then you exile it, that can be a bit annoying, but seemed like a fine sideboard card to use, and you're not too worried about that situation against most of the graveyard stuff anyway. Then 3 Stony Silence, which is fine, but it's sort of limited in some of the spaces that you can use it, because it disables your own Lotus Blooms. So you just have to be a little bit careful about that, because having a Lotus Bloom in your deck to let you potentially combo off on turn 4 versus something like Tron is probably going to be like one of your best routes to victory, compared to just having like a Lotus Stony Silence, which might not even slow them down that much anyway. So you have to be a little bit careful about that. But if your opponent was playing something like Affinity, for example, you have so many other like anti-creature tools in your deck anyway that normally you can Stony Silence them and then delay all the offense with all your other stuff, and then cast Enduring Ideal with Nykthos. So, and those kind of matchups, Stony Silence can be really good, but maybe these are just a bit unnecessary. Then 4 Grand Abolisher, kind of like a strange choice, but against your mono white sorceries and Stash Enchantments deck, all of the control decks are probably trying to board out as much removal as possible versus you, so the Grand Abolisher will go relatively uncontested, and then not only can it attack down your opponent's like Tefiris and Narsets and stuff, but it of course has the City of Solitude effect, that your opponent can't do stuff on your turn, so it pretty much guarantees that your Enduring Ideal will resolve, and then it does all that while giving you double devotion as well. So it seemed like a really good option, but I never drew it in the tournament, so I'm not totally sure about that. Another card that does a similar thing for this deck is Beseiju, which is pretty good as a one-off probably, I think, just to make your Enduring Ideals uncounterable, but I do not own one, so you won't find it in this list, but I think it's likely to correct to play it at least in one copy. And the last 4 cards were just for On Thin Ice. This is the reason why you need the Snowlands. It's pretty solid. Just a 1 mana removal spell for any creature that sticks around and gives you 1 devotion as well. Maybe this is unnecessary because I found myself sort of not knowing what to board out for this. In some matchups it's kind of obvious, like your opponent's playing some aggro deck that doesn't target you with anything, so you pretty much just board out your ley lines and you board in these. In that situation it's kind of obvious, but like if you're playing against like Death Shadow or something, then this seems good because it's 1 mana removal, but like you kind of need to keep your ley lines in because they're going to be thought seizing you and stuff. And then is this better than Stasis Snare? You know, like this is 1 mana and that's obviously great, but Stasis Snare gives you 2 devotion, sometimes that's better, you know. So in a lot of situations this On Thin Ice felt like a really small kind of like marginal upgrade. But then again, if you play against something like humans, for instance, or spirits maybe, you know, then this card is probably like a really solid option to have. So yeah, I'm not too confident about the sideboard really. These are just some like generically good white sideboard cards that I just threw together. Yeah, so that's the deck. The matchups that I played against in the FNM that I won were round 1 I played against Hardened Scales, round 2 I played against Burn, and round 3 I played against Grixis Death Shadow. Hardened Scales felt like an easy matchup because it's just like a kind of like a fair creature deck. It doesn't really do anything except play creatures and try and attack you. So it's generally pretty soft to stuff like Wall of Omens blocks their the new card that has protection from multicolor, so I can't remember what it's called. Stone Coil Serpent, is it? You know, that if they double up on Arcbound Work or whatever, you can name that with Rune Halo and it stops them all. You have Stasis Snare to prevent any Inkmoth shenanigans. You know, like these kind of matchups are like basically free, and it's also kind of difficult for them to kill you before turn 4, especially when you have all this like cards that easily interact with them. So yeah, these matchups are kind of like your easiest ones. And then Burn is also like the same thing. Like you have so many cards in the deck that just make that matchup like free. I mean, obviously you're playing 4 main deck white Leyline, which is like absurd, and then you have main deck Rune Halo to shut off Eidolon or anything. Main deck Unlife, main deck life gain tokens. You know, it's just like a free matchup. And that's kind of like how I would describe this deck, you know, like against the matchups where your white permanents are great, then you'll probably have a good matchup, and if they don't do anything, then you'll have a really bad matchup because you're just like a really slow, clunky version of Ad Nauseam or Scapeshift. So for instance, and then the third matchup was Grixis Death Shadow, which seems like it could be a bad matchup. You know, you're kind of like this slow, clunky, big mana deck. But the ley lines, you get a lot of mileage out of the ley line in that matchup because they can't interact with you with Inquisition or Thoughtseize. And once their interactions is limited to only counterspells, you can play around that with either Nevermore, which you name the one they have the most copies of is like Stubborn Denial. But then if they have no creature on the board because you've been removing it with Stasis Snare and stuff, then you can name like Disdainful Stroke instead. Or you can just play Grand Abolisher and then you don't have to worry about it at all, because I'm pretty sure they would have boarded out all of their like fatal pushes and dismembers and stuff. So yeah, so that could be a much more awkward matchup if you don't have the leyline. But if you don't mulligan and you have like the natural leyline, then it seems like a pretty straightforward thing to do, straightforward way to play, straightforward match to win. I think so for example, the matchups where this card is not good, I think, or the deck is not good rather, I think against a lot of control decks it probably struggles. Cards like Ruined Halo are obviously not very good against most of the threats that control decks try to throw at you. Putting all of your eggs in one 7 mana sorcery basket is not a very good thing to be doing against decks that have counter spells. Yeah, so those kind of matchups are probably a struggle. The worst matchup by far is, as I'm sure you can probably figure out, Tron. Specifically the like green big version with Khan Liberated and stuff. As you can imagine, most of your cards don't really do anything whatsoever versus the big colorless planeswalkers. Like if your opponent resolves like a Ugin or a Khan, you basically can't ever win. So, like you have Nevermore, which kind of helps a little bit, but sometimes you just name the wrong one. You know, like you name Khan Liberated and they just play Oblivion Stone and wreck your whole board anyway. It's really not a great situation. Like the plan against those decks is you play Dovescape, which cuts off all of the Planeswalkers and Oblivion Stone. And then after you get Dovescape, the next thing you get is you get a Nevermore, and you name Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger. So normally that 2-card combo is pretty good. Like that's almost like a hard lock against the Tron decks. You can even get a second Nevermore and name Worldbreaker if you want, but I think most people aren't really playing that card anymore. Yeah, so that's kind of like what you have to do to lock up the game. But it's really hard to just even resolve an Enduring Ideal in the first place when they have so many ways of attacking your permanents. So yeah, that's probably the worst matchup. So yeah, if you think your metagame has a lot of like linear decks that get really punished by things like Nevermore or Ruined Halo, then this deck can be a really good choice, because you have like a reasonably solid proactive plan and just resolving the Enduring Ideal, but you also have all of these basically like main deck hate cards that just make it so difficult for those kind of strategies to win. And then if all their opponents are playing like fear decks with counterspells or tons of ways of destroying your permanents, that's when this deck can really struggle. So you probably want to avoid playing this into those metagames if possible. So yeah, so I really like the main deck. I would advise not changing that unless you really feel that like you're in a metagame where, for example, Stasis Snare doesn't do anything. Then you can try and replace that with Suppression Field or even Ghostly Prison if you think that's better, but I'd really caution against doing that at the moment. Yeah, I do like the main deck, but the sideboard, I think there could be a lot of space to improve the deck with the sideboard. Whether you want to play more kind of threats, so like more Dawn of Hope, or you could play something like Assemble the Legion. That card seems quite good, but I don't really know if you can splash it off just the 4 temples. That might be a little bit ambitious. Otherwise you'll have to look at stuff like Sigil of the Empty Throne, or Sacred Mesa, or Sacred Mesa is probably just worse than more Dawn of Hopes. So that's one option for the sideboard. You can play some like big Planeswalker maybe, like the 6 mana Elspeth, and then versus Tron, Damping Sphere is possible, but it turns off your Nykthos, so that's not without its drawbacks. Then the white beast within is also interesting. Obviously you don't really care if you give your opponent an elephant, so 3 mana Stone Rain without having to skew your mana base could be an exciting option as well. So yeah, there's lots of different ways you could tweak or tune the deck up, but mostly on the sideboard I'm pretty happy with the way the main deck sits at the moment. So yeah, so that's all this deck list for today. So obviously this is all a jumble and you can't see it anymore, but as usual, the entire list will be in the description, and yeah, if you have any good ideas for the sideboard or anything like that, make sure you leave a comment and let me know so I can make some changes, because I got a bigger tournament coming up this Sunday in 2 days. So yeah, I hope you guys like that. Modern format, enduring ideal. This is Life ITCG signing out.